In the small town of Willow Creek, where time seemed to stand still between rows of ancient maples, Arthur Sterling was more than just a man, he was an institution. For 40 years, he stepped into literature classroom number 204, and the sound of his footsteps on the old linoleum was a signal to his students that they were safe. Arthur wasn't a typical teacher who dryly recited the curriculum. To him, every student was an untold story, a book with blank pages that he helped fill with golden letters. He wore his blazer with patches on the elbows not because he couldn't afford a new one, but because every extra cent he had went to those who needed it more. His wife, Ellen, often laughed, saying Arthur was trying to save the world with Shakespeare and kindness, but deep down, she knew, without him, this town would be a much darker place. Arthur's memory was his greatest gift and his heaviest burden. He remembered everything. In 1992, he secretly paid for a new roof for little Martha's family after her father lost his job at the factory. He did it so they would never know who the benefactor was, preserving their dignity. In 2005, he spent an entire night at the police station with young Jake, who had fallen in with the wrong crowd. Arthur didn't yell, he simply sat beside him, reading The Old Man and the Sea aloud until the boy realized his life was worth more than street fights. He wrote recommendation letters that were true works of art, describing not a student's grades but their soul. Because of him, farmers' children became surgeons, and the children of single mothers became successful journalists. Every graduation was a celebration for him, yet a small death, as he released a piece of his heart into the great unknown. "You taught us how to fly, Mr. Sterling!" they would shout, tossing their caps into the air. Arthur would smile, wiping away tears, believing those wings would never let them forget the way home. But reality proved to be far crueler than any classic novel. When Arthur retired, and Ellen suddenly passed away within months, the silence in his house became almost physical. The large house on the edge of town, once echoing with the noise of students coming for extra tutoring or tea and cookies, turned into a mausoleum of memories. Arthur turned 68, and his body began to betray him just as gradually as his graduates' memories betrayed him. His heart, which he had so generously shared with others, now struggled just to pump blood. Parkinson's disease added a tremor to his life that made even writing a simple letter impossible. Every morning, he went out to the porch, sat in his old rocking chair, and waited. He waited for the mailman, for the sound of an engine, for a random knock at the door. At first, he received calls on holidays. "Hey, Arthur! I had a son, named him after you!" Leo would exclaim. But over the years, "Named after Arthur," became just Arthur, and the calls turned into short texts, which eventually vanished altogether. His loneliness was not just an absence of people, it was an absence of gratitude. One day, when Arthur felt a particularly sharp pain in his chest, he decided to look up the news. He saw Claire, the girl he once bought a prom dress for because her mother was an alcoholic. Now, Claire was the editor-in-chief of a major fashion magazine in New York. In an interview, she spoke about her success, about how she was self-made, never mentioning the teacher who pulled her out of depression and taught her how to write. Arthur held no grudge, he simply turned off the TV. He tried to find them all on social media, but all he saw were the glittering facades of their lives, expensive cars, yachts, world travels. He wrote to them, "I am so proud of you, my dear student," but in response, he only saw a receipt. They were too busy with their flight to look down at the ground where the man who gave them their first push remained. The winter of that year was particularly brutal. Arthur rarely left the house. His fridge was half empty, and his medication was running out. He didn't want to bother anyone, believing that everyone had their own adult lives and problems. On the final evening of his life, he sat by a fireplace where the embers had long since died. He held an old photo of the class of 2010. They had all promised to reunite in 10 years. 12 years had passed, but no one had come. Arthur felt an icy hand squeeze his heart. It wasn't just physical pain, it was the pain of being unneeded. He tried to stand up to get some water, but his legs gave way. He fell to the floor, shattering Ellen's favorite teacup. Porcelain shards pierced his palms, but he didn't feel it. He looked at the phone on the nightstand. He could have called for help, but he was so tired of being alone that he simply closed his eyes, imagining he was walking back into room 204, smelling of chalk and old books. Arthur lay on the floor for 3 days. Every day, people he had taught to be human drove past his house. A neighbor, whose son Arthur had helped get into the academy, saw the mail piling up in the box but thought, "He probably went to visit relatives, lucky old man." No one knocked. No one checked. When the mail finally began to spill onto the road, the mailman eventually called the sheriff. When the door was kicked in, the smell of death mixed with the scent of old paper. Arthur lay facing the photographs of his students. His final gaze was fixed on a photo of a smiling little Jake, the boy from the police station who was now a billionaire. What happened next was the pinnacle of cynicism. The news of the death of the Willow Creek legend spread across the country faster than the wind. Social media exploded with posts of gratitude. Jake wrote a long essay about how Arthur saved him from prison, adding a link to his charitable foundation. Claire posted a photo of Arthur with a quote, garnering millions of likes. They all competed to see who could write the best obituary. The town declared a day of mourning. Thousands of dollars were raised to erect a golden monument near the school. But on the day of the funeral, at the old town cemetery, only one person stood under the pouring rain: the school janitor, Mrs. Higgins, who remembered seeing Arthur give his own lunch to a hungry first grader. Claire wrote that she desperately wanted to be there, but an urgent show in Paris wouldn't let her go. Jake sent a massive wreath of white lilies that cost more than Arthur's entire annual pension, but he didn't show up because he was negotiating a deal in Singapore. The casket was lowered into the ground in a silence broken only by the sobbing of the old janitor. Not one of those who learned to fly found the time to simply stand by the grave of the man who gave them their wings. The golden monument was later installed. It read, "To the teacher who will never be forgotten." Yet, the true story of Arthur Sterling didn't end in gold. It ended in a cold house where he died in total isolation, while the world he built with his own hands simply passed him by. His letters of gratitude, which he had so carefully collected, were thrown into the trash by the new homeowners during renovations because they had no market value. Only the wind carried the abandoned pages with the words, "Thank you, you changed my life," which were now needed by no one but the memory of Arthur himself.